Hello everyone. Yeah, nice to be here. It's lovely to be taking part in this day. I was just saying to Peter, we've met so many people. We're part of the Maritime Kent Special Interest Group. We've met so many people who have an interest in Maritime Kent, so it's great to be here telling you a bit about this research I've been doing for a number of years now into this character, but partly because it's a fantastic story, but also because Kent has such a fantastic maritime history, and that really, this demonstrates that to a small extent. Plus, as Pete says, I'm an archivist, so it's lovely to have used some of the records that I did to find the details of this chap. So I hope between those sort of three things, this will be of interest. I've only got 20 minutes, so I've got to crack on. And this is only part of the story, actually, but I hope you'll find it interesting. So William Harrison, clipper ship captain, this story started when I was living in Harwich, which you may know is a little village next door to Leeds Castle in Kent, a bit overshadowed by Lenham, but I was walking the dog through the churchyard in Harwich, and I came across this memorial buried under a yew tree, which had this inscription on it. You can't really read that on that slide, but this is what it said. It said, "Sacred to the memory of William Harrison, who died while in command of the ship Highflower from Sydney to London." It gives the latitude there, aged 39 years, leaving by his widow, Catherine, and 5 children. Which fascinated me, actually. I just started working at the Maritime Museum, and I thought, blimey, that sounds interesting. What's he doing in a churchyard in Harwich? Quite a few miles from any water, particularly any water you could use a clipper ship in. And so I started really, again, because I'd started the Maritime Museum, just started looking at a few things, and very quickly started building up a picture of William and his ship. This is the Highflower, and it's a print from the collections at the Maritime Museum up in Greenwich. And I was fascinated to see it was so big. It's not. It says it's a clipper ship, and I'm saying it's a clipper ship, but actually it's a Blackwall frigate. It was built in Blackwall, just opposite where the O2 is now in Greenwich, at the Blackwall Yard, the famous Blackwall Yard. So, having seen this and knowing that in the Maritime Museum we also looked after Cutty Sark, this ship is roughly the same size in terms of tonnage, around 1,000 tons, and in terms of length. So I thought that intrigued me as well. What was this chap doing in charge of such a huge ship when he was obviously connected with Harwich? This was the next thing I found in our photographic collection, which is a picture of Highflower at Gravesend in 1872, taken by a photographer called Frank Gould, who was pretty well known. He started off in a chemist shop, but started taking photos, then started taking photos of ships at Gravesend just before they left to go off around all parts of the world. So this was an amazing find, really, a beautiful glass plate negative of Highflower. And in fact, there's a couple of people just here. I spent hours with a magnifying glass trying to work out if that was the captain or not, but I couldn't pin that down. But lovely to have some images of the ship. Then, of course, anyone who wants to know anything about a merchant ship will go to Lloyd's Register. Lloyd's, as you probably know, insured ships, still do insure ships, and class them in these gradings, insurance gradings. And I found an entry in the Lloyd's Register for 1866. You can just about make out here the Highflower. Here's the tonnage, 1,112. Sorry, 1,012. The length of the ship, 193, I think. Cutty Sark is just over 200 foot, so she's very much in that same bracket. She was built in London in 1861 by the Greens. Greens of Blackwall, a pretty famous shipbuilding firm, and you can see there she's on the London to Australia route. And she's classified as A1. So if you were a passenger thinking of going on board the Highflower, if you saw the A1, you'd think that's pretty good. She's classed A1 by Lloyd's, so she's pretty safe. This is just to show you the Blackwall Yard. This is where the O2 is, as you probably know, on that sort of bend in the river at Greenwich. And this is the Blackwall Yard here. You can just about make it out up the top. And this is a view of around the time of the Blackwall Yard there. So a pretty impressive organisation. And Greens were a key part of that, particularly a chap called Richard Green, who was in fact the person who commissioned Highflower. And this is a picture of him. He died shortly after he'd commissioned Highflower in 1863, but he was part of the Green family. And at Greenwich they have the green of Blackwall's collection there, with a lot of documents relating to shipbuilding at the Blackwall Yard. And this was one of the things I found, which was a bill of sale between Richard and his brother Henry, selling High Flyer to Henry for the sum, I think it was of £7,000 here. So having found out that High Flyer was on the London to Australia run, I looked up some general figures on that, particularly as Cutty Sark obviously was on the same run. So voyages to Australia at that time took about 100 days each way, outward via Cape of Good Hope and then back via Cape Horn. A Blackwall frigate, which is what High Flyer was three-masted, composite bill with iron beams and a wooden hull, again like the Cutty Sark. Rigged with topsails, 4 mainsails, single topsail on the mizzen as well, and these top gallants as well at the top, that typical clipper ship set up in terms of the sails. So the Blackwall frigates were really, I found, a precursor to the clipper ships, so they were sort of almost a trial run before ships like Cutty Sark and her great rival Thermopylae started ploughing that route to Australia. They usually took between 50 to 100 passengers, and on the final voyage that Harrison was on when he died, I found out there were 46 adults and 10 children. And the cargoes they took included copper, leather, wool and iron. I found I couldn't find really the manifest of the supplies for the High Flyer, but I did find one for True Britain, which was another ship, a very similar ship a bit later on. I was astonished to see this list of provisions consumed on the passage. If you have a look through that, there's some incredible amounts of things, including 20 bottles of curry powder, you can see there. And of course, there's a good long list of alcohol, which you needed to get through one of those voyages. 24 dozen bottles of sherry, 150 dozen of bottled ale, only 4 dozen of champagne, so probably anticipating a safe arrival. It's an amazing list, that actually, which deserves a bit more attention. The next thing I found was looking at this fantastic database called Trove, which is you may have used newspapers, particularly for Australia. I found this from a Sydney newspaper called The Age about the High Flyer, advertising the Blackwall line of packets, including Superb, Blackwall, Dover Castle, Wellesley. So that was more ships that the Blackwalls built, the Greens of Blackwalls built. But this is advertising the splendid new river-built clipper ship High Flyer, commanded by William Harrison, belonging to Messrs. Green of Blackwall, as we know. This is now in her second voyage to this port. Intending passengers are invited to inspect her very superior accommodation. She's berthed alongside the Sandridge Railway Pier. And the passage money, £16 to get back from Australia. But that would be 100 days you'd be aboard. Mind you, you would have all that alcohol, so not bad. But I think the £16 was probably for the steerage passengers in the sort of hold, basically. It would obviously go up for anyone who wanted the superior accommodation. So having found that, I thought, well, Sandridge Railway Pier, that sounds interesting. What is that? And again, we had a picture of that in the collections in Greenwich. Incredible to see that that view with all these ships arriving from all corners of the world, and particularly to think William Harrison. He was aged 39 when he died. He was on this trade. I was saying to someone outside, must have been like in those days in the 1860s, someone going to Mars. You know, you're in a small village in Kent, and the next minute you're in at the Sandridge Railway Pier near Sidley and Melbourne. They had a small railway line there that took the passengers off into the city and back, and of course all the cargoes as well. So again, looking at that Trove database, the Sydney Morning Herald here for 8th of March 1872, just before High Flyer sailed on this voyage where Captain William Harrison unfortunately passed away. There was this list of all the passengers, and you can see here what I was saying about the children on board as well. This was a list of the actual passengers, and then the bottom and 22 in immediate steerage. Obviously, you wouldn't really bother talking about their names. The posher passengers would have got the names. And then not only that, but this was all the cargo they were carrying as well. So for him, William, to be in charge of that with all those passengers, plus all this sort of commercial cargo, which people would be waiting for back in England, and also actually in India on the way back. it must have been a heavy responsibility for him. So having found out a bit about the ship, I thought, what about William? And obviously, anyone who's done family history would have done a bit of this. The first thing I looked at is the baptism register for Harwich. I thought, well, if he's buried in Harwich churchyard, presumably he's from Harwich, or he's got a connection with Harwich. And there he was in 1833, so taking away 1839, his date of death, that got me to 1833. And you saw he was the son here of William and Alice. And I think I've worked out that's a farmer on the end, although it's not quite clear. So his father was a farmer. So again, I was thinking, how did he become a clipper ship captain? This is Harwich around the time, well, actually it's around the turn of the century, the last century, 1900. So very much as it would have looked like in William's day. So then, of course, I went to the census, knowing he was born in 1833, and found out that he was in a place called Holme Mill. This is his father, Edmund Harrison, here, again down as a farmer, with, I think it ended up with 13 children. But William was halfway down that list, age 7, there in 1841. Then, of course, I was looking for Holme Mill in Harwich, which is still there. The mill's not there, but the Holme Mill house is still there. And it's slightly to the sort of west of Harwich, going towards Lees Castle. This is Holme Mill House, this is Holme Mill Cottage, so these could have, they're still there all this time later, so could have well been where the Harrison family were based. And on the tithe map again, 1840, I found out that Edmund Harrison was quite a big landowner in Harwich, with around, I think it was 140 acres. It says 61 on the tithe map, but he had 140 in the census entry. So this is Holme Mill down here, but there are areas also, fields nearer Harwich. So he was quite a big landowner, but he was still a farmer. So I was wondering why his son became a clipper ship captain. He's also mentioned in a poll book, Edmund Harrison, William's father, being at Holme Mill. If you're in the poll book, you're obviously a quite wealthy person, quite influential and important person. And this is the census extract that I found for 1851, where he's listed as a timber merchant employing 30 men and a farmer of 140 acres employing 7 agricultural labourers. But this was the real key, because this was in the Maidstone Journal for 1853. Edmund Harrison of Harwich begs to inform the public that he has now taken all those extensive premises known as Pybus's Wharf, and that was in Maidstone, so that's the first connection with a bit of water. This is Maidstone in the early 1900s, but you can see the amount of ships on the Medway, and Maidstone was actually known as a port, or listed as a port at the time, even though it was so far inland. And of course, this is the bit by Brenchley Gardens. This is Maidstone West here. But you can see all the wharves along the river, so there's a lot of activity. And if Edmund owned that, perhaps that's how William became involved with ships and boats. If I'd have only looked to the right of that memorial at the time, I would have seen Edmund Harrison's grave. So the family were buried in that area. And he obviously died fairly young, 65, in 1854. The next clue that I got was from some records at the National Archives, and these are the merchant shipmen, the Merchant Navy tickets. So these were tickets for people going into the Merchant Navy. And you can imagine there were quite a few Harrisons, and there were quite a few William Harrisons. But I found this one, ticket number 478,263, so he's quite far on, which shows William Harrison here of Harwich, Kent, so I knew it was him. Date of birth, 11th of June, 1833. Capacity, he's a midshipman, and this is in 1860, I think it is. Sorry, 1850 that is. And then I love this. The hair is light, eyes are grey, complexion is fresh, height is growing. So I think at 17 he probably still was. So probably had so many they had to go through, they didn't bother measuring them, just thought looks like he's still growing. Marks none, first went to sea as a midshipman in the year 1850, hadn't served in the Royal Navy. So that's the first indication. At 17 he got his ticket and went to sea. And then 10 years later, in 1860 again, we have the collection of Masters and Mates certificates up at Greenwich and the National Maritime Museum. It's on ancestry as well. And finding this Master's certificate when he became a Master Mariner, was a key thing, because not only do you get the date when he became a master, 1860, but you get the whole list of all the ships that he was in before he got to become a master mariner. And so this is a link to that certificate, and you can see he's done, I think it's 5 years or so at sea in all these ships, and most of these were Blackwall frigates. His first one was called the Blackwall, his first command in 1861, and this is an image again from the museum's collections. Shortly after he qualified as a master, he got married in 1862 to a Catherine Williams here, whose father was a chap called John Williams, a gentleman. This is a marriage at St Paul's in Islington. It says that Catherine was 18. I actually think she was 16. And there's an interesting story behind her as well, because on the mention of William's death in the Sydney Morning Herald, again something I tracked down via Trove, it said he was the son-in-law of Mr. John Williams of the Metropolitan Hotel of this city. So actually he'd met Catherine on one of his trips over in the High Flyer to Australia, and then brought her back to marry her. As I think a 16-year-old, which must have been a bit of a shock for her as well, coming all that way from Australia. And this is a shot I found from the Sydney archives of the Metropolitan Hotel. So this was the hotel that John Williams owned, where his daughter lived, and presumably William may well have stayed there and met Catherine and married her. And so then the 1871 census was interesting, because William's not mentioned, but Catherine is here as the head of the household and the wife of Captain Harrison. And then it lists her children here, 1, 2, 3, 4 at that stage. And this was interesting as well, because this top one here of where born, she was born in Australia. This top one here says on board ship, Indian Ocean. So that was in the Indian Ocean. The next child was Harwich. The next child was Australia. The next child was Harwich. So you got the feeling she was going backwards and forwards with her husband, and that's what, obviously gave an indication she was going backwards and forwards. Is that almost it? Okay. Just to finish off, so the next stage was looking at logbooks and crew lists, which again we have in the collection, some at the National Maritime Museum, many are in Canada, many at the National Archives. This was the logbook for the birth of Edmund at sea in the Indian Ocean, and you can just about see here, Catherine, wife of William Harrison. And if you think, by my calculations, I think she was about 20 at that stage, so giving birth on a ship in the middle of the Indian Ocean on the way back to Australia to see her family. Incredible. And then this is the voyage where I found out how William had died. This is the crew list, but it also includes the log. So this is 1871, and you can just about make out here, I think I've done a beautiful animation. So this is William Harrison at the top, from Harwich, as the master of the ship. And this is the log part of the crew list, which has this little part here about William Harrison at the top. And it says, William Harrison, master, departed this life, disease and angina pectoris, and that he was committed to the body of William Harrison to the deep with the usual ceremonies. Edward Lowe, who was the first mate. There's a detail there, you can just see. An angina pectoris, I think, was just a heart attack. I say just a heart attack, but obviously he had all that responsibility on this 100-day voyage. And this was the list of his possessions, which they always did with the captain when he died at sea. And this was pretty poignant as well, because halfway up here, there's 2 pairs. Remember, he was coming home to his family, 2 pairs of ladies' boots, presumably for Catherine. And then a bit further down was this one, which is 5 packages of children's toys. So he was bringing them home for his children. And then obviously I had the latitude and longitude, and on Google Maps you can just type that in and find out exactly where High Flyer was when Harrison passed away. He passed away in the middle of a storm, apparently. There's much more to tell you, but these are the Falklands down here, and he was right off the coast of Argentina and died, unfortunately, on board. bit of a whistle-stop tour. There's plenty more to tell you. I was saying to someone outside, it needs the film rights, actually, when you start exploring the rest of it, particularly Catherine's family, because it turns out her father, who owned the hotel, was a convict. Yeah, there's quite a bit more, but I'll leave that with you. Probably be on Netflix shortly. But anyway, I hope that's given you a bit of an idea about sort of, partly for me, it's amazing that somebody from that small village, age 7, with a farmer as a father, ended up in Australia, marrying an Australian woman, going backwards, almost commuting to Australia. I hope that just gives a bit of an indication. I've only scratched the surface, really. There must be many more stories like this of people from Kent who were involved in things like that. And the thought of him in command of that ship, having started off in Harwich and where I lived, is amazing, to be honest. Thanks, Peter.